In Vietnam, the enemy wasn't always in front of you. Sometimes it was beneath your feet. This is every weapon used in the Vietnam War and how it was really used in combat. At the heart of the Vietnam War was the infantry soldiers fighting in dense jungle, often just meters away from the enemy. The U.S. standard rifle, the M16, was lightweight and capable of rapid fire, giving American troops a technological edge on paper. However, in the harsh jungle environment, early versions of the M16 suffered from jamming issues. In the middle of an ambush, a malfunctioning rifle could mean the difference between life and death. On the other side, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces relied heavily on the AK-47. It was less accurate at long range, but incredibly reliable. Mud, rain, and dirt rarely affected its performance, making it ideal for guerrilla warfare. In sudden, close-range firefights, that reliability often proved decisive. Other weapons also shaped the battlefield. The M14, used early by U.S. forces, delivered powerful shots, but was heavy and difficult to control in automatic fire. The SKS rifle, used by Communist forces, was simpler and effective in trained hands. Support troops often carried the lighter M1 carbine, while sidearms like the Colt 1911 and Tokarev pistols were used in close combat. In the jungles of Vietnam, every weapon had strengths and weaknesses, but survival often came down to which one worked when it mattered most. As firefights intensified, machine guns and heavy weapons became essential for controlling the battlefield. For U.S. forces, the M60 machine gun, nicknamed the Pig, was a cornerstone of infantry firepower. Capable of delivering sustained automatic fire, it could suppress enemy positions and provide crucial cover during ambushes or troop movements. In the chaos of jungle combat, the sound of an M60 firing often meant the difference between holding the line and being overrun. Opposing forces relied on weapons like the RPD and later the PK machine gun. These were lighter and more mobile, fitting perfectly with guerrilla tactics. Viet Cong fighters could quickly set up, fire, and disappear into the jungle before a counterattack could arrive. Mobility and simplicity gave them a tactical advantage in hit-and-run engagements. Among the most feared weapons in the war was the RPG-7. Cheap, simple, and devastating, it could destroy armored vehicles or disable helicopters with a single well-placed shot. For American troops moving through hostile terrain, the threat of an RPG ambush was constant. Meanwhile, the U.S. deployed the powerful Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun. Mounted on vehicles or defensive positions, it delivered immense stopping power, capable of cutting through cover and light armor. In Vietnam, heavy weapons didn't just support the fight, they shaped how it was fought. Air power became one of the defining elements of the Vietnam War, shaping not only how battles were fought, but how soldiers experienced the war itself. For American troops on the ground, the sky was both a shield and a weapon. The most iconic symbol of this was the UH-1 Huey helicopter. More than just transport, the Huey was the lifeline of U.S. operations. It carried soldiers into landing zones deep in hostile jungle, evacuated the wounded under fire, and delivered supplies to units cut off from the outside world. The moment a Huey descended into a clearing, everything changed. Dust and debris exploded into the air, visibility dropped, and the sound of rotor blades drowned out all communication. Soldiers had only seconds to jump out before taking fire. Many describe those moments as the most vulnerable point in any mission. But helicopters were not just transport, they were also weapons. Armed gunship variants of the Huey carried machine guns and rockets, circling above the battlefield and firing into tree lines where enemy forces were suspected to be hiding. In dense jungle terrain, where visibility was limited and enemies could disappear instantly, this kind of aerial fire support was critical. Higher above, jet aircraft like the F-4 Phantom dominated the skies. These fast-moving fighters carried bombs, rockets, and missiles, striking targets identified by ground troops or reconnaissance. Yet, despite their speed and firepower, identifying enemies in jungle terrain was extremely difficult. The enemy rarely formed clear front lines, making airstrikes both powerful and uncertain. Then there were the B-52 bombers, capable of unleashing massive carpet bombing campaigns. Entire sections of jungle could be flattened in minutes, leaving behind craters and shockwaves that could be felt kilometers away. For soldiers on the ground, the aftermath of a B-52 strike was surreal silence, destruction, and a landscape completely reshaped. Perhaps the most controversial and feared weapon delivered from the air was napalm. When deployed, it spread burning fuel across wide areas, clinging to surfaces and igniting intense fires. It was used to clear vegetation and expose enemy positions, but its effects were devastating and unpredictable. In the chaos of jungle warfare, napalm blurred the line between tactical advantage and humanitarian cost. Despite overwhelming air superiority, air power in Vietnam revealed a harsh truth. Even the most advanced technology struggled against an enemy that was hidden, mobile, and deeply familiar with the terrain. While the United States relied on advanced technology and overwhelming firepower, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces fought a very different kind of war, one built on patience, deception, and deep knowledge of the terrain. In Vietnam, the jungle itself became a weapon. One of the most feared elements of this warfare was the widespread use of booby traps. Unlike conventional weapons, these traps didn't rely on direct confrontation. They waited. Hidden along trails, near villages, or even inside abandoned equipment, they were designed to injure, slow down, and psychologically exhaust enemy troops. Simple yet brutal, punji stake pits were among the most common. Concealed beneath leaves and soil, these pits were lined with sharpened bamboo stakes, sometimes coated with toxins or waste to increase the chance of infection. A single misstep could take a soldier out of combat instantly, forcing units to halt and evacuate the wounded under constant threat. Other traps included tripwire grenades, rigged to explode when triggered, and improvised explosive devices made from captured or repurposed munitions. These were often placed in areas where U.S. troops were likely to pass, turning routine patrols into constant high-risk operations. Equally significant were the tunnel systems. Stretching for kilometers beneath the jungle, these underground networks allowed Viet Cong fighters to move undetected, store weapons, and launch surprise attacks. Some tunnels contained living quarters, supply caches, and even command centers. To American forces, the idea that an enemy could appear, strike, and vanish into the ground created a constant sense of uncertainty. Fighting this invisible threat was both physically and mentally exhausting. Soldiers could never fully trust the ground beneath them or the silence around them. In Vietnam, danger wasn't always seen. It was hidden, waiting, and often triggered without warning. In a war dominated by jungle terrain and guerrilla tactics, vehicles and tanks played a complex and often limited role. Unlike open battlefields in World War II, Vietnam's dense vegetation, narrow paths, and muddy ground made large-scale armored warfare difficult. Still, both sides used vehicles when and where they could, adapting them to an unconventional battlefield. For U.S. forces, the M48 Patton tank represented heavy firepower and protection. Armed with a powerful 90mm gun and thick armor, it was capable of destroying enemy positions and providing direct support to infantry units. In open areas or near urban zones, the M48 could dominate the battlefield. But in the jungle, its size became a disadvantage. Thick vegetation restricted movement, and narrow roads made tanks vulnerable to ambushes, mines, and RPG attacks. To improve mobility, the U.S. relied heavily on the M113 armored personnel carrier. Lighter and more versatile, the M113 could transport troops through difficult terrain while offering protection from small arms fire. It was often modified in the field, equipped with additional machine guns and armor, turning it into a mobile fighting vehicle. Still, like tanks, it remained vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and hidden explosives. On the opposing side, North Vietnamese forces used vehicles such as the PT-76 light tank. Smaller and amphibious, it was better suited for Vietnam's terrain, capable of crossing rivers and navigating difficult ground. However, it lacked the armor and firepower of U.S. tanks, making it less effective in direct engagements. In Vietnam, vehicles were not the dominant force they had been in previous wars. Instead, they served as support, powerful when used correctly, but always at risk in a battlefield where the enemy could strike from anywhere and disappear just as quickly. Beyond conventional weapons, the Vietnam War also saw the widespread use of chemical agents and extreme close-range weapons tools designed not just to defeat the enemy, but to reshape the battlefield itself. One of the most controversial was Agent Orange, a chemical herbicide used by U.S. forces to strip away dense jungle vegetation. The goal was simple: remove the enemy's cover. Without thick foliage, hidden supply routes and ambush positions would be exposed from the air. In practice, entire areas of forest were left barren, fundamentally altering the landscape. But the long-term consequences went far beyond the battlefield, affecting both soldiers and civilians for years to come. Another terrifying weapon used in close combat was the flamethrower. In tunnel systems and fortified bunkers, where visibility was low and enemies could be just meters away, flamethrowers were deployed to clear enclosed spaces. The intense heat and fire could force hidden fighters out, but using such weapons required soldiers to get dangerously close, often under direct threat. Then there was napalm, delivered from the air or used in ground operations. Unlike conventional explosives, napalm spread burning fuel across wide areas, sticking to surfaces and continuing to burn at extremely high temperatures. It was used to clear jungle and destroy enemy positions, but its effects were chaotic and devastating. Fire moved unpredictably, and once deployed, it was nearly impossible to control. In Vietnam, these weapons blurred the line between tactical necessity and destruction. They showed that warfare was not only about defeating an enemy, but also about transforming the environment in ways that would last long after the fighting stopped. The Vietnam War proved that technology alone wasn't enough to win. In the end, it was tactics, terrain, and adaptability that shaped the outcome. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to WarTech for more military history and weapon analysis.